it's a very diverse job, and it keeps you very busy. You're always switching gears, and you have a new crisis and new issues and something you're always working on every day.
And joining me is Commissioner Goehring of the Agricultural Department. Thank you again for taking time today to visit with us about what the Ag Department is and what it does. If you could just lead us off, giving us just a little bit of background about yourself.
Yeah, so my background, actually grew up on a farm and ranch near Minokan, outside of Bismarck, North Dakota. Been exposed to agriculture all my life. I think I remember being like 11, 12 years old. My aunt asked me what I was going to do when I grow up, and I said, I'm going to be a farmer. And it didn't quite go that way. Ended up, worked for a lot of my neighbors as a ranch hand, worked construction out of high school, still worked part-time as a hired hand on a farm and farms and ranches. And had a little mishap where I crushed my foot, and working construction after a couple years I found out I couldn't take it. So I went back to school, and actually tested very high for sciences and math. So went into pre-med tech and became a medical lab tech. So I thoroughly enjoyed it. Did that at the same time that I was farming part-time with my grandmother. And at some point she wanted to exit, and I offered to buy the farm. So then I was going to school, farming and interning, and then eventually was working at the lab and farming. Mm-hmm. And at some point that just got to be too much after a few years, and ended up quitting at the lab. I loved it. I was in microbiology, so I got a background in chemistry and microbiology, which fits wonderfully into agriculture, right, and into farming and ranching. Ended up doing some other, I had a seed business, had some consulting going on. A lot of my friends and neighbors and colleagues across the state were urging me to get involved in some organizations, and at the state and regional level, and even at the national level. And eventually I got a call from some people really involved in agriculture here at the state level, and that was through some of my other connections. Somewhere along there too, I got to tell you, I ended up being the president and chairman of the state's largest domestic insurance company. So I got a background in insurance too.
Sure.
Did that for 10 years. Got asked, they said, we need someone to run for agriculture commissioner that has a really deep, intimate knowledge of agriculture, but also understands business. You should give that a try. Mm-hmm. All that poking and prodding actually prompted me to throw my name in the hat, and I ran for the office. First time I lost by, I think it was about 0.3%. So it was a pretty close race. Eventually, my predecessor decided to vacate the position, took another position at the national level, and I was appointed by, at that time, Governor Hoban to serve as Ag Commissioner for the state of North Dakota. It's a constitutional office,
right,
which is a little bit different from other states where they create the department and then they hire someone to serve in that capacity. Mm-hmm. Here, the Ag Commissioner was created, and then the department serves them. So that it has a little bit different feel and flavor, which does add some real complexities to the job. But we can get into that. But for the most part, that's how I got my start. That's what I did, and I didn't. And I will tell you right up front, although I lobbied and worked with and a lot of legislators and went to Washington, I didn't have a deep sense of admiration for them. I didn't really care for politicians because I found there are some that are just, well, at the time I thought they were all superficial and shallow. I came to find out over a period of years, there might be a few that are superficial and shallow. There's a lot of very intelligent people with high ethics, good moral judgment. They bring a lot of experience. Maybe it's very specific to an area. But I gained a better appreciation for public servants out there. And again, you're going to come across, like you do in life anywhere, you're going to get those that just show up, but you're going to get others that are committed, and they're such a great resource and asset. So I've kind of turned that corner a little bit and have a much better appreciation for the people out there that are working to serve our state and our nation.
Sure. Well, all right. Well, thanks for the introduction. So give us just a brief overview, a little bit, the responsibilities, the duties of the Ag Commissioner. I mean, agriculture, of course, one of usually the first or second biggest industry in North Dakota between oil. So what are some of those duties that you have?
So that's unique also, probably none like any other position in the United States, primarily because about 45% of my portfolio is food and agriculture. The rest of it involves oil and gas, Bank of North Dakota, State Mill and Elevator, Transmission and Authority, pipeline, housing. I got housing as part of my portfolio. Water, the flood and appropriation and all of that's it's great and it's fascinating. I also have State Board of Tax Equalizations in my portfolio, infrastructure, trade, business development, some marketing aspect to that in different areas. It covers a lot. In fact, I probably touch everybody's life in North Dakota, even if they don't know that. I mean, if some would say, well, we're not farmers and ranchers, so we don't know much about you. That's fine, but if you eat, you probably know a little bit more about me. It's a very diverse job, and it keeps you very busy. You're always switching gears, and you have a new crisis and new issues and something you're always working on every day, every hour. It seems like that's different from the previous hour.
Sure. So when you were elected to the office, not being the typical politician, was it kind of a surprise to see what the position enveloped?
I had some idea. I don't think I wasn't really that surprised. I kind of took it like anything else I've done in my life. When you have a job, you learn as much as you can about it. And I think I probably spent the first 3 to 6 months just trying to understand, first of all, the culture, and then all of the different programs. We have well over 140 different programs within the department because we cover everything from animal health to plants and pathogens, fertilizer, pesticides. The marketing division covers a lot of our Pride of Dakota programs, our farm to market programs. That's just some bit of a taste and flavor. Then we have our policy and information division. That's working on a lot of things, not only at the state and regional and local level, but also at the national level and sometimes at the international level. I also serve on the Tri-National Accord, which puts me in a position to, on an annual basis, to deal with trade irritants and policies and issues between Canada, the United States, and Mexico. So we get to do that collectively, plus each country separately. So it puts you in the middle of a lot of different things that you hopefully get to address, whether it's in marketing, transportation, specifications. There's so many different things involved in trade activities. That's probably one area at the international level we do quite a bit in, or I do quite a bit in.
So how many people help you out? How many make up the ag department in North Dakota?
Which is surprising, 81. We are one of the smallest departments, well, I should say smallest staffed almost in the United States. I think Wyoming is a little less than us, in the 60s. But when you look at what we cover and all the different programs, it's unbelievable. Oh, I forgot to mention we also have the meat, milk, and eggs. So we have dairy, we have meat processing, we cover all the hatcheries. We also have mitigation programs, mediation programs, credit counseling. We also cover meat processing. So there's an aspect of that puts us right into the food side directly to the consumer, and also into the school and hot lunch programs, breakfast programs.
Nice. Hands and everything.
Yeah.
Well, when we think about the agriculture industry, how does the department contribute to the success and sustainability of the North Dakota ag industry? Now, obviously, there's a lot of different, as you said, a lot of programs and so forth. What are maybe a couple of the biggest ones? Or
well, the one thing that we try to do is really stay in touch with the industry itself. And when you have, and I think this is something else that isn't well known about agriculture in North Dakota, we are different from the surrounding states. When you think about agriculture in other states, it's soybeans and corn. Well, North Dakota has that. And in fact, soybean receipts are the largest in the state out of all the different sectors. Wheat being second, livestock being, I think livestock is third or fourth. Anyways, but we produce 54 different commodities in the state, which a lot of people don't realize. And about 10 of those, 10 or 12, we are number one in the production of. So when you think about hard red spring wheat, durum, I think barley we dropped to second. Sunflowers we're number one in the production of in the United States. Dry beans, in fact, with dry beans like pintos, navies, black beans, red beans, kidney beans, we produce 37% of all the nation's dry beans right here in North Dakota. That's significant. Most people don't even know that. Peas, lentils, the pulse crops, which Montana is now growing more and more of those as we've continued to ramp up our breeding programs and developed some better genetics. Also, rye, canola, flax, they fall in that category of being number one in the production of. So with all those different commodities, when you bring everybody together, you bring everybody in and you sit them at the table and you start to have a conversation about what are some of the things that they all have in common that they're struggling with. Each one of those sectors have their little challenges. Mainly, you'll always hear most of the time about markets. Transportation infrastructure is a big issue, which I have another role in some of that to some degree, especially with the research and working with the ag infrastructure program. But with that, you try to find those common threads and themes that really will help sustain the industry. And generally, you're going to find things like risk management, crop insurance. Those are going to be big ones that farmers need to mitigate and manage risk. A strong farm bill that also will have at least some reasonable target prices or reference prices in place. There is, if the market falls completely out of bed and things are so bad, there is a reference price or a loan price. Now, it's pretty low, and you certainly couldn't pay your bills and sustain yourself, but it can get you over the hump sometimes. Those are things in which you look at. And since there's little nuances that exist in all the different commodities and areas, you really have to narrow it down as to if there is a theme or a thread, how do you pull that together? Because maybe pulses and in the dry bean area, maybe there's something significant they need. Maybe there's something along the lines of transportation. There's just things that you do to promote that. Plus, you can look at technology.
Mm-hmm.
We do a lot of work in the technology area to try and make sure that we're relevant and we can and that our producers can continue to be relevant. As the state's largest industry, there's a lot of things to consider and try to support their efforts. So whether we're talking about planter technology that you can have variable rate application of seed, fertilizer, plant food, looking at different technologies with spraying equipment now. I mean, there's pulse technology that's out there. There's see and spray technology, which really minimizes a lot of drift and reduces the amount of product that's even being applied to a field. And think about the new see and spray technology, and although it's not perfected, they're doing a pretty good job. But you'll be going through the field at 10 miles an hour in the sprayer, and it'll identify a weed, and it'll just spray the weed. Instead of spraying the field like generally you had to do a broadcast.
Sure.
So trying to make sure that you keep agribusiness somewhat accountable, but it also means being that contact with agribusiness and researchers to let them know some of the things that are being sought after by those farmers and ranchers out there.
Sure.
So those are areas where we continue to try and work to, and there are so many, but it's really fascinating. Some of the new drone technology that's coming out, some of the new AI we've been working with, especially on drone applications, using a lot more optical signatures to help with weed identification, so you can go out and actually do some spot spraying. Even if you don't have that type of sprayer, you might be able to hire services through a drone where once you've GPS located where that might be, you can just send it there, do the job, and leave the field. So there's a lot of different things we're working on there to help farmers and ranchers be more efficient, relevant, and trying to manage in such a high expense industry. I remember a few years ago, maybe it was several years ago, I had a reporter. He worked for one of the newspapers, and he called me up. He wanted to do an interview, but one of the things he said, I just don't get it. Everybody talks about how ag is number one in the state. And he says, I've been checking. He said, you guys contribute nothing to the state. He says, oil and gas, all this extraction tax money, it comes in. I mean, you're talking about a budget of 60% that comes from oil and gas revenue, and I don't see anything in there from ag. I had to chuckle a little bit, and I said, I don't want to be too defensive here, but I am going to share something with you. We have 26,000 farmers in the state, farmer ranchers. Probably about 15,000 of those live and make a living from farming and ranching. But within there, if you look at just central North Dakota, look at our area, the average size farm, if they're making a living, you're talking about probably 3,300 acre farm, 3,300. But I said they're generating $1 million in gross revenue. And that's just a little slice in that whole entire township, let alone the county.
Right.
They only get to keep about 12 to 13% of that if they're lucky. And sometimes in the good years they keep a little more. But the reality is they spend that in town on Main Street on goods and services. You think about tires, you think about automotive technicians, diesel technicians that you need. Now more and more computer technicians. You think about the tire shop, you think about the hardware store, the supply centers. Everybody you're employing that, yes, you don't pay a direct tax to the state of North Dakota, but all the people you're employing makes a big difference. And that's why when you look at North Dakota's numbers, 25% of the workforce is supported by agriculture, and yet we're less than 2% of the state's population.
Sure.
So he had a new perspective afterwards, and he says, okay, I get it. Yeah. Some of that money from oil and gas is staying in the state, but a lot of the companies and a good portion of those royalty owners no longer live in the state.
Sure.
So it does make a difference, and that's why ag is number one. Plus, we have the highest multiplier effect in the economy. I think on the lowest number you look at is about 3.7 times that dollar will roll through the economy. If you're talking animal agriculture, you're talking anywhere from 4.5 upwards of 8 times that dollar will roll through the economy. So it really does tend to feed your economy at the local level and at the state level.
Sure.
And then consider that 90% of the land in North Dakota is owned, operated, or managed by farmers and ranchers. That's significant. It makes us one of the most aggy states in the Midwest. And in fact, there's people at the region, especially like Region 8 EPA and Region 7 EPA have commented. They said North Dakota has the most ag land and the most agriculture in their state when you look at percentage-wise. So,
yeah, that is quite the stat. What interactions, when we're talking about agriculture and perhaps is the impact economically and so forth, what interactions does your office have in creating or testifying with legislation that impacts agriculture?
Quite often, on quite a few areas. When you think about it is a highly regulated industry, so one of our approaches that we've taken is, and I'm kind of going off on a different path here, but I'll circle back to this. One thing that we understood and I wanted to accomplish when I came in here, which was about 15 years ago, was let's change the way we engaged the regulated industry. Instead of playing the gotcha game like I've seen EPA do and some other agencies do, they hand you a manual that's 4 or 5 inches thick. They throw it on the table in front of these companies and in front of people and say, oh yeah, just go through that and learn it and we'll be back. How disingenuous. And then the other problem is some of it's interpretation. And if you don't interpret what they're saying and how they're saying it, you could be wrong and you're going to be suffering a fine, a violation of some sort. Your name's going to be written somewhere in some book, and it's just not fair. So we looked at education compliance, and I talk about it frequently. In fact, a lot of states have started to pick it up and do it in the last 10 years. But because we have primacy, which means we have the authority from Congress to actually run some programs, federal programs in the state, our role is to go out there, work with industry so that they understand what they have to do to be compliant. It may be 5 inches thick, but we can get it down to where it might take an hour just to go through and talk about what it is that's relevant to them. And how is this applicable? And I know it says this, but this is what it means. That's what we've worked to do. So whether it's in meat inspection, whether it's in our livestock and grain licensing and bonding and working with them to help them understand what they have to do, whether it's in poultry operations, whether we're talking about a fertilizer and pesticide facility or just the application of those, working directly with the farmers, agribusiness, registrants. We work with registrants a lot, and also some of the universities and researchers to try and make sure that we have the most relevant research available. And even with respect to minor crops, that we can do some research to make sure that there's still tools in the toolbox, which goes back to the sustainability issue. To do these things, you're going to have to be economically viable. But if you talk to any producer out there, any farmer and rancher, they're there to enhance and build on their legacy. Mm-hmm. They love that land. They drink the water beneath it. They farm it, they manage it, they care for it. They just want to do it right, and they want to do things that really help to build soil health and to build a future for their family. And so that puts us in the middle of all of those conversations with legislators. Mm-hmm. It could be about like ag infrastructure, which supports value-added opportunities for meat processing or animal agriculture out in our communities, which, by the way, animal agriculture is one of the biggest value-added opportunities for farmers that are growing grain. Mm-hmm. And they've come back to realize that, because if all your eggs are in one basket and you're relying on dumping it down a pit at the elevator, you're a bit limited. Mm-hmm. And you really don't get to manage your risk, because whatever the global market is going to pay for grain is what you're going to end up getting for it. Mm-hmm. And this creates opportunities. With the legislature, you just get a chance to look at developing programs that are smart and work for the grower, which in turn works for the consumer. Keeps it affordable, keeps it abundant, provides a little bit of diversity. Plus, on top of that, it puts me in the middle of all kinds of other conversations, whether we're talking about water projects where you have diversion, or you have flood control, or you have appropriations, rural water systems, which and sometimes support those value-added businesses out there. But it supports those communities and all the people that are living and working there and providing services and supporting the activity in that particular region. There's also, when you think about oil and gas, how brilliant to have the agriculture commissioner serving on the industrial commission. Because when you think about it, if 90% of the land in North Dakota is farmed or managed, operated, farmed and ranched by producers, then that other small percent that's either being mined or there's oil extraction or gas mm-hmm. underneath there, the surface is still owned by a farmer or rancher, or still being managed to some degree. Right. You have to think about, how do you mitigate some of that? How do you walk through this? Because mineral owners have a constitutional right to develop their minerals. Mm-hmm. Let's just do it in a reasonable way that still respects and certainly doesn't impose or harm those operations to a great degree. Mm-hmm. So it puts me in the middle of a lot of that. Same way with the mitigation issues. You always have these threats from endangered species from the federal level. NGOs and activists have made life so difficult out here on the prairie. And then you get these other interests that come in. Sometimes they tie themselves to sportsmen or sportsman interest, and really their agenda goes a little bit beyond that. Mm-hmm. And it wants to impose regulations that are harmful. Restricts your ability to manage like you should out there in the countryside. And I think about some of the work that had been done previously where easements were being taken just to mitigate some energy transmission projects or wind farms. 2.1 million acres of federal easements were put on land out here on grasslands. And although in other states it's not a big deal, in North Dakota, we're still building and growing. And what people don't understand when they sign those easements, you can't drill a well, set up a barn, build a house, or a road on that property anymore. Nothing will ever change on that. And in fact, your ability to run a transmission line or a power line across there or a water line won't happen either, along with a pipeline or even any road work. It's just completely brought things to a standstill. So part of where the legislature came in, and we worked on this with the legislature, is we take over those responsibilities to bring transparency and accountability back into the situation and do proper mitigation to make sure that we're not harming future generations and we're still getting things done that address concerns that others have about habitat.
Sure.
So there's just a few things. There's quite a bit. Taxes and storage facilities and how we're going to regulate the grain and livestock industry as they purchase commodities and cattle, and making sure that there's some oversight there.
Sure. Well, coupled with that, you're also probably the state cheerleader for the ag industry and all everything that it makes. What does the office do to support marketing and getting that product to market for sale to benefit North Dakota farmers?
Well, nothing directly, probably all indirectly. I think about it shortly after I came here. I got a letter from USDA saying they were going to quit marketing services for livestock in the region, primarily because they're going through cuts. We found a little bit of money that we can put towards that every year to continue those services. Now it's their employee, but we pay for their operating costs to at least get to a market. Because to really have true price discovery, you need to have somebody in the marketplace that's actually watching that and then collecting that data and reporting on it. And it really helps to set prices and the framework for farm service agency programs, such as livestock indemnity. Those are things that we've certainly been out there trying to support. We worked on a lot of intermodal and transportation issues with the railroads. Also, being involved in infrastructure, have supported, and I know at times I get frustrated going down the road and hitting another construction site. But we've been very actively involved in making sure that we're addressing how infrastructure needs are addressed out in our communities. It's great on our 4-lane roads and our 2-lane roads to make sure they're up to speed, because they're transporting the bulk of most of the products that are moving, whether we're talking about oil and gas down those roads, commodities, milk, but we're also talking about a lot of services, plus we're talking about the motoring public, whether it's for enjoyment or their own business. It's getting from point A to point B. But it also has to do with supporting their efforts out in the countryside. When you think about those rural roads, I mean, no one sees those, and they kind of forget about them. And quite frankly, that's like, who cares? But the reality is, without your ability to connect A to B, it might be out in the hinterlands. It might be someplace you would never, ever drive to. But people live out there, and they're growing food, and they're growing products that benefit us in so many different ways. So I guess every nook and cranny and corner and space in North Dakota I care about, because somebody lives there, somebody's working there, and somebody is doing something on our behalf.
Mm-hmm. Well, in recent years we've struggled with labor in a lot of other areas. How's it looking for agriculture, and what kind of challenges do we see in that venue for the ag community?
It's a growing challenge. So somewhere between 1,900 to 2,600 H-2A workers are utilized in North Dakota every year. And those H-2A workers either come from Central America or South America, but a good chunk of the really skilled, higher, I don't want to say higher learning, those individuals that are skilled in a different way to operate equipment come from South Africa, mainly. So that's always been important to those farms and ranches out there. I can cite you an example of work on this almost every spring. Far too many calls to even keep up with. But a couple out in central North Dakota have an average sized farm, and then they have about, I think he said, 600 cows. Just those two. And to put the crop in and to manage those cows, they always rely on H-2A workers. Mm-hmm. The government's been getting very poor at really addressing those needs. It's gotten worse every year over the last 7-8 years. Mm-hmm. At one point in time, USDA actually advocated on our behalf with the Labor Department. So every commissioner, secretary, or director in the United States, one of us, could actually call on behalf of our constituents. And if we had a case number, we could talk with the Department of Labor. We could find out what's going on, how soon before these employees are getting here. And then recently, in about 3.5 years ago, that all quit. Mm-hmm. Now it's silent, and it's gotten worse. And what's even more discouraging to a lot of these communities and these farmers and ranchers is the amount of illegals that are coming into the country, but you can't get legitimate green card, visa-carrying, competent individuals that can actually help you out here. Mm-hmm. That's been a frustration. Now that has to do with a labor side of it. There's another side to it. And we've seen this, and I'll give you just a little background as to why things have changed so much, because I get this question too. Farms keep getting bigger. Mm-hmm. If you go back to the early 70s, a family of 4 could live off $5,700. And you probably, and if I'm thinking like central North Dakota, you're probably talking 2 to 3, maybe 4 quarters you could raise a family on. Mm-hmm. So maybe at most section of land. We watched as we went into the late 70s and the 80s, where all of a sudden you need 14,000 for a family of 4. And it just kept going up. It went up several years ago. It'd be more than several years ago. Maybe that was in the mid-2000s. $57,000. Mm-hmm. Now, why I bring all that up for a family of 4, cost of living, on the farm, the price of commodities hasn't changed all that much. And in fact, if you look at your margin that you're living off from, trying to make a living off from, has actually shrank because mm-hmm. expenses have continued to go up. And although a bushel of wheat right now is maybe selling for $5.20 versus $3.50 that it was, 30, 40 years ago, you have to raise more of it, and you have to farm more acres, because if you're only making $17 an acre profit for family living, now you're going to have more acres to do it. And what's happened is you can't sustain more people on the farm, so the kids are leaving. You've had to farm more acres. Now you've had to get bigger equipment, and it's continued to, as some would say, feed on itself. But that's part of the problem. The farms have had to get bigger to meet their family living issues, and they've had to automate more. They've had to go to larger equipment. They've had to go to more technology to help them be more efficient and relevant, and just do a better job while trying to cut those costs and maintain. So you've seen a lot more consolidation. You've seen a lot bigger labor issues anymore. And I know even on our farm, my son and I farm together. We have one hired man. We actually need two. Mm-hmm. You can't find a second one. We've hired second one many times. Mm-hmm. And there's just too many mishaps, too many issues. They only want to work now and then,
Sure.
or they have other personal problems in their life, and so it just continues to plague you, and it becomes a liability, just simply because you can't maintain or sustain that operation without certainty. Sure. So whether it's certainty in labor, certainty in regulations, or some certainty in markets, you could drown in the stress.
Sure. Well, last couple questions, and kind of building off what you said here, because other states like Montana, South Dakota face similar issues. How do you work with our neighboring states on some of those similar ag issues?
So there are, especially in the federal area, when it comes to a lot of the farm policies, we actually share somewhat of the same vision, same concerns. So our policies and agendas align very well. We have some specifics and some uniqueness to our own states. You think about Montana from east to west, that's quite different. Mm-hmm. And some things we get a chance to work with them on. Other things, we really don't have a dog in the fight. We'll support their efforts and be a cheerleader.
Yep.
But we just don't really have something there we can add. There's federal legislation and policies we do work on together. I think about WOTUS. 26 states signed on, or 25 other states signed on with us. Mm-hmm. They share the same values, the same concerns, and that's monumental and it's historic. But it shows how in many respects we're all doing the same thing. We might have a different approach, or we might have some different players. Maybe the topography is different, the geography is different. Maybe even within our states, politics might be different. Mm-hmm. And you got to migrate through that. The nice thing I like about ag, I will tell you, is at the national level we have the national NAS that we call it, National Ag State Departments of National Association of State Departments of Agriculture. And politics, partisan politics, are hardly ever raised. And it's because when it comes to food and agriculture, and it's about the people, politics are generally pushed off to the side. Every once in a while, California might come up with something that we all look and roll our eyes at, because it's pushing a political agenda. Mm-hmm. Or every once in a while there'll be another state like Minnesota or a few others that might try to push a climate change policy that we're all like, oh, come on, let's just get down to the business of agriculture instead of worrying about where politicians want to take something. Mm-hmm. So, especially when you see an industry that has contributed so much, not just economically, but you look at it, it's food security, which supports national security, which on the other side, economic security is part of national security.
Mm-hmm.
We do more for the environment. Look at how many more trees we've grown in the state of North Dakota since statehood. Look at, and there was a period of time that we went through with the types of farming practices and systems in place that when the old moldboard plow did a lot of damage on the prairie
Mm-hmm.
because we lost a lot of organic matter. We've turned that corner since the 90s. Biotechnology has helped us advance so much more, adopting new practices, new systems. Now you see a lot of farmers and a lot of ranchers that are focused on soil health.
Mm-hmm.
And we tend to congregate together to figure out what more can we do? How can we support the microbiome and that whole system, and recognizing soils and their limitations, but how can you build off from that? How can you do more with less? And I will see more rallying around with our surrounding states. In fact, you can go from here to Texas and you can take about every state in between. We're all pushing and working towards the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
Cover crops, rotations, no-till, minimum till systems. How can we bring on new genetics and breeding programs that advance our industry more and serve the people and the public best?
Sure.
And sometimes that gets used against us by activists and environmentalists because they'll be like, that's what you're doing is bad, or what you're growing is not good. It's like, you have no idea.
Mm-hmm.
You haven't been out here at ground zero. You're not intimate with what we're doing and how we're doing it. But you're misinforming and it's disingenuous to the public and the consuming public.
Sure.
So, yeah, we work together in a lot of those things.
Yeah, well, good. Well, my last question that everybody gets, so if the Ag Department disappeared from state government, what's the impact, short or long term, for the citizens of North Dakota?
Well, the Ag Commissioner would still have to develop some type of department to carry out the work. That's what makes it unique and different. It'd be a free-for-all. Yeah, I mean, that'd be like taking, emergency services away from a community. Your fire and ambulance and police.
Mm-hmm.
We serve a role. We have a purpose. That is a good question, and I'm pondering all the different impacts and effects. Government has a role. I don't believe in big government, but I do believe that you have to have that structure there to provide oversight and accountability. I practice a lot of grace and mercy, which means most of the time people don't intend to do something wrong or harm anybody. And you take that in consideration, and you can smell it when you see it. So when we regulate, it's not a problem if you practice and take an approach like that. But I have told people, God help you if you have any intent to harm or hurt people. And unfortunately, I've come across a few of those in this job. And Katie barred the door, because we will do what we have to and need to remove you from the system of harming and hurting people, whether you're doing it economically or you're doing it in a manner that would compromise or manipulate food and commodities and production. Thankfully, I've only come across a few of those. I love North Dakota, and I love our culture, and I just how great people are in the upper Midwest. I don't necessarily have the same problems they do in other states when I've talked to my colleagues. But unfortunately, rules and laws are made because of bad actors. And that's the role we play, is we're mediating. And we're just trying to help make sure that others aren't harmed by the things that are going on out there.
All right. Mr. Commissioner, thank you again very much for taking time to help us learn a little bit more about the department and your role.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian.
And thanks again for listening to 701 Civics as we dive in and learn about the civics processes and people and positions in North Dakota. Please be sure also to stop and rate us on the podcast format that you're listening to so we can continue to increase our audience and be better citizens of our state and of our nation.